Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Empowering Faculty and Staff to Support Mental Health and Wellness on Campus. Before we get into today's presentation, we have just a few housekeeping items to run through. This webinar will be recorded, and a copy, along with the slides, will be sent out to all registrants at the conclusion of the presentation. Attendees are in listen-only mode. However, if you'd like to chat with us or ask a question, you can do so on the right-hand side of your screen in the GoToWebinar control panel. If you're on social media, we invite you to connect with us by tweeting @Cognito or using the hashtag CognitoWebinars to continue the conversation online. For everyone on the line not familiar with us already, at Cognito, we believe in the science of learning, the art of conversation, and the power of virtual human simulations to measurably improve social, emotional, and physical health. We empower faculty, staff, and students to take an active role in creating a healthy and safe campus environment for all. Finally, now I'd like to turn things over to our presenters to introduce themselves and get us kicked off. Darren, why don't you get us started?
All right, so hello everyone. My name is Darren Jones. I serve as the Manager of Strategic Initiatives and Partnerships at Cognito.
Hi everybody, my name is Glenn Albright. I'm sorry I can't be with you visually, and thank you very, very much for attending today's webinar. I am a clinical psychologist and co-founder and director of research at Cognito. I'm also an associate professor at Baruch College. And for those of you who haven't heard of Baruch, it's one of the senior colleges of the City University of New York. And one of my main teaching responsibilities there is to teach a graduate clinical course in trauma, grief, and recovery. Very happy to be with you.
Hi, and I'm Kim Weiland. I head up our education vertical products, so that covers both higher ed and K-12, and I'm excited to be on here helping to represent the production and the product side today.
Hi there, I'm Brian Fluman, also without seeing my face, but I work closely with Kim also on both of our education verticals as a product owner, which essentially means I manage the life cycle from inception to release and work very closely with our subject matter experts that help us build all of these products.
All right. So to get us started, as Scott was mentioning, we believe in the art of conversation, and we use game theory and the science of learning to really create experiential learning opportunities that empowers faculty, staff, and students to contribute to that sense of belonging on campus. And so we look at it from a holistic student wellness approach, where the training solutions really it extends beyond knowledge acquisition. And so we go beyond definitions and really think about those evidence-based practices that really contributes to an upskilling of abilities to have productive conversations and impactful conversations, so that students on campus feel heard, they feel as though that they belong, and they feel supported throughout their experience. And so when we think about powerful prevention strategy, the focus of this webinar is about mental health and well-being. And what we find is that those evidence-based practices can extend to a number of different areas outside of mental health and well-being, but definitely contributes to it, such as sexual misconduct prevention, alcohol and other drugs, and upcoming, we have a diversity, equity, and inclusion training solution as well, which is developed by prevention experts. So we have a wonderful grouping of subject matter experts that extend in faculty, staff, and including students that help us create these innovative experiential learning opportunities for all stakeholders that contribute to that supportive and safe community. And so I'm gonna pass it off to Glenn, who's gonna give us an overview on COVID-19 and student behavioral health in a context of higher education.
Thank you, Darren. I think a lot of these statistics are not going to surprise you, but it's really good for us to all start off on the same page, because just understanding that 1/3 of the student population has experienced a rather profound change in their living situation. You can imagine, as a student, going from classroom to be totally online from your home, and doing online work at home can be incredibly stressful, especially if you have a quarantine family and you're not set up for a good learning environment. And as a matter of fact, I've had some students actually participate in online classes from their closets because that's the only place where they could have privacy. And also there's concerns about sense of safety and security, and not only safety from the virus, but also physical safety, because we know as a result of the pandemic, there's been an increase in violence in home, an increase in drinking, drugs, making the home environment more unsafe for a lot of people. And then up the statistics to approximately 2/3 experiencing financial instability. Holy smokes. And that's not only in student income, but also family income, which stresses out the family. And there's worries about contracting the virus and how long it will last, especially with the Delta variant being so profoundly impactful on people in this nation, and worrying about people who can contract this virus. And lastly, difficulty in accessing mental health care. I mean, during the pandemic, there's been a significant increase in the prevalence of severity of depression and anxiety. According to a Healthy Mind study, 39% of students are experiencing severe to moderate depression, 34% anxiety, and you have a large uptick in suicidal ideation, where 11% of students have thought about suicide in the past 30 days. And for LGBTQ, this increases to approximately 50%. And all this leads to 3 student suicides per day. And of course, under-resourced families are more pronounced in terms of the impact on mental health and wellness. Next slide, please. And again, the statistics are at all not unknown, because we know that untreated mental illness, the stress associated with the pandemic is and can affect academic attendance and success, your ability, the executive functioning that you and I need to do well in classes and school, an increase in test anxiety, and that's all contributed to the peer and family relationships that have changed, as I alluded to earlier. And then that kind of adds to a decrease in self-esteem, that you can feel like you have this ability to accomplish what you need to do as a student. And then along with that, there are barriers to seeking help, including the stigma associated with seeking support services, and even a lack of understanding or knowing what services are available and knowing how to go about to access them, especially during COVID-19. Next slide, please.
And so when we think about all of the sobering statistics that Glenn mentioned, we also think about, okay, now what, right? That we know the what, and we know why we should care. And to give you context, I came to Cognito from a traditional student affairs background, most recently as Associate Vice President of Student Engagement. So I worked in every functional area in the student affair, under the student affairs umbrella, except the counseling center. And so with that, being on call, so yeah, I was that person that got the call at 3 a.m. about a mental health emergency, a student that is in distress. And so when I bring in that experience, these statistics really resonate, especially now. What we have before you is some additional statistics in a white paper that we did with the JED Foundation. And as you can see, start with the right, 87% of faculty, staff, and students believe it's their role to support others, essentially, to be able to identify signs of distress and connect to resources. But we see a roughly half do not feel adequately prepared when it comes down to identifying or confident in the ability to approach and refer. And in those moments where that instant happens, a student comes with a concern, there is that fear of saying the wrong thing. As being the chair of a behavior intervention team, I had numerous amount of conversations with faculty and staff who didn't know what to do, and sometimes in those moments, it's important to really pause and take that moment as a relationship building opportunity, right? There's a lot of support that can be given if the conversation goes in a very productive way. And so we're able to really craft what are those practice scenarios to, I said before, upskill faculty, staff, and students to be prepared and have that confidence to go into these conversations so students feel supported. We can go to the next slide. And what we have here are, and I think as time has evolved, the term gatekeeper, mental health gatekeeper skills, because the responsibility has grown from just the counseling center. And really, we see mental health and well-being as being a part of an institutional responsibility. Everybody has a role in providing a caring and safe and supportive environment for students. When we talk about institutional responsibility, we have to ensure that if someone has that responsibility, that they have the skills to be able to fulfill that role. We know that a lot of mental health or even students in distress, it may show up in a residence hall. It may show up in a student organizational meeting. It could be in a campus life event, and it can show up in classrooms, right? So if we start to educate and train individuals on how to identify those things and then prepare them for those conversations, we can connect them to resources, and resources can extend beyond the counseling center as well. So we're seeing that we have that need to increase the skills to recognize, communicate, referral, and also self-empowerment. So within the simulation, and Kim and Brian are going to talk about that a little shortly, but we have our learning model that is built within every simulation that we really want you to understand and get a grasp on, so you can hear and experience later on the science behind those training solutions. So I'll give it back to Glenn to review the learning model behind our training.
The learning model really employs a number of different evidence-based communication tactics. And as you can see, they're drawn from various areas ranging from neuroscience, social emotional learning, adult learning theory, and applied game mechanics. One of those evidence-based communication strategies is motivational interviewing. It is a phenomenal evidence-based strategy to learn how to effectively communicate and help students to open up. There's been hundreds of studies, dozens and dozens of meta-analytic studies showing its impact, and it involves such things as asking open-ended questions. So a student comes in, something like, hey, what's going on, or telling me what's happening, as opposed to a question that's closed and can be answered by a yes or a no. And then making affirmational statements like, I really appreciate you coming in to talk, or that's a great question, or hard to talk about those things and you're doing a great job. So you're really letting the student know that you're empathizing with them, you're interested in them, and that's going to make them open up, to trust you, to feel safe. And you couple that with reflective listening, where you say back to them, so you feel like this, or it sounds like that. Again, letting you know that you are listening. And these are all very important components of active listening. That coupled with emotional regulation, where you're understanding what the student feels, what you're feeling when you're listening to the student, mentalizing, which you understand that the student is a separate agent. They have their own feelings, their own beliefs, their own thoughts, and that's acceptable. Empathy, you know what empathy is. Empathic accuracy is when you know what someone's feeling, yet you don't have to be feeling it yourself. And all of these, mentalizing, empathy, and empathic accuracy, all have been shown increase that relationship you'll have with the individual you're talking to, allowing them to open up and reveal to you what's going on inside, so you can direct them to the correct support services. Next slide.
Before we go to Kim, because I believe you're going to speak about the product, I wanted to add that when we're talking about the skills, and yes, the scenario is regarding mental health and well-being, but these are life skills. So when we talk about the training, so we are teaching life skills. Is how do you be a better support system to whoever it is? And in this context, and you'll see the scenario is based in the context of higher education, so a faculty and student or a staff and student relationship. But if you step back for a second, you'll be able to see that this is just what you use with a friend, with an intimate partner, with your child, right? And so we see this as being very, very holistic and manifested through roles of faculty and staff and students. Just wanted to add that.
That's a great thought.
I'll jump in for going with the product. Thank you, Glenn. I'm going to pull you back into the conversation as we go through. For those of you who are familiar with us, you know that we have been working in this area since 2011, and Glenn was actually the co-founder of Cognito and the person who brought the first of this product to market. So while I'm going to talk about the product as we have evolved it, definitely want to keep pulling Glenn into the conversation as we go. And what I love about this and what we've seen over the years, as it has been in so many universities and colleges over the years, is that faculty and staff really do feel empowered. They do feel that they are more confident and prepared to have these conversations, and that they are going out and having these conversations, and they know that that is growing this sense of belonging and support and access to resources on campus. One of the great things about all of our jobs is that we get to hear directly from faculty and students about the outcomes of these programs, and it is absolutely wonderful. I had one faculty member who was doing some user testing for us on this one and had used the product in the past and said, we've actually instituted now within our meetings, our weekly meetings, where we talk about not only our students and what are we doing to support our students, but also ourselves. And it's just really this whole shift on campus. So I want to dive into the actual product. As I said, we just went through a pretty major update to the program. It has been out there since 2011. We have made iterative changes to it since then. This was a pretty large one, and the reason was because we were hearing a lot of things from the market that they wanted to see, especially around differentiated paths for faculty and staff. So we'll talk a little bit about that today. And they wanted us to expand some of the examples of support services well beyond the counseling center. So what are some of those other options on campus? Not every student is going to feel that the counseling center is the right match for them. So we actually model in the conversation other examples that they can refer to. And I love that we have been able to add in some of these other pieces that were well in the works before COVID, but definitely meet our moment in time. One of the conversations that we'll talk about is now done. It's visually, it looks like it is being done over conference video chat. And that has been very well received by the faculty who have seen this already, the faculty and staff who have seen this. I do want to talk a little bit about, and I hope I'm going to turn my air conditioner off. Keep that noise down. But I do want to talk a little bit about some of the changes to the actual conversation, and we'll go into detail around these. But we did a lot of interviews with both the schools that we currently work with, as well as programs that were looking for solutions. And one of the things we kept hearing is there are three sort of buckets of conversations that are happening a lot. And so we have tried to make a practice scenario for each of those. The first one that we're going to talk about, this practice scenario, is really where a student is coming to you. So this is not in the identify ahead of time positioning. It is identifying in the moment. A student has come to you, they have set the meeting, you're sort of that trusted adult for them, and they are going to open up as the meeting goes along. And so really identifying that a student is in distress in that moment and helping them open up, as well as the one that we have had around identify and then approach. And then we'll talk about the last one, which is really very differentiated between faculty and staff. Something happens, and for staff, that student is, another student is going to come and tell you about it, and now you have to go to this other student and open up that conversation, as well as for a faculty, it actually happens in your classroom, de-escalate that moment and then follow up. So definitely some new practice scenarios there, excited to talk about those. Let me just go over quickly some of the overarching learning objectives for those of you who are not as familiar with our program. We're really making sure that we're going through the basic knowledge that our faculty and staff are going to need to be able to identify students who may be in distress. Then we're going to teach those conversation skills that Glenn talked about, that they can help a student open up about that distress. And then really where we focus most of our time is at the top of that pyramid and really in the practice and around how are they then able to apply those within those role plays. And within those role plays, we then give coaching and feedback. They can use that coaching and feedback to then improve how they're doing in those conversations. So I want to talk a little bit about how we do that in each of the conversations. So I'm going to turn it over to Brian to talk about the first of our role play practice conversations.
Thanks, Kim. So this conversation, as you can already see, is the conversation that is virtual, or that resembles a virtual conversation. The specific scenario here is there's a student named Maya who comes to you or requests to have a meeting, ostensibly to talk about academics, but over the course of the conversation, it becomes very clear that there are other issues going on with her life that you, as this faculty character, has to recognize. And during the course of the conversation, you get to use all of those skills that you would have learned earlier on in the product, the skills that Glenn went through already, that are all part of the motivational interviewing, including reflections, asking open-ended questions, empathizing. And then the key element here, as Kim mentioned earlier as well, is that when you get to the referral choices, there are many different options. So instead of just always referring to the counseling center, as some of our products have done in the past, now it's opened up and there are all different types of on-campus organizations and offices that you as the character are able to refer Maya to based on the conversation that you had. Another thing of note I think is worth mentioning is that, you know, we understand that not all faculty are very comfortable with having conversations or get into personal things that are going on with the students. So throughout the conversation, there are opportunities to say, you know, I'm ready to move on. Let's talk about referral. You don't have to. There's no obligation, obviously, to kind of act as a counselor or anything yourself.
Yeah, and as we get to the next conversation, that's a really important point, is that at no point are we encouraging faculty and staff to act as counselors. And one of the things that we heard loud and clear is some faculty and staff are going to feel much more comfortable having a little bit deeper of a conversation, going through a couple more of the practice scenario, getting more background on the student and how it's going and some of the things they might be interested in trying, whereas some are going to want to move more quickly to referral. And we heard very clearly that if they are able to move through to referral and able to make a student feel comfortable that there are resources available to them, make that student feel that they are supported in that, that's really the goal. And so we made sure that that was something that if they wanted to do a little bit more practice of those skills, they could. And if they wanted to move more quickly to referral, they could as well. For the next conversation, we are definitely covering suicidal ideation. We want to make sure that everyone knows that remains a portion of this program. For those who are using this as suicide gatekeeper training, this is the conversation where you are still going to cover suicidal ideation. This has been in the program for a while, so those of you who have seen the program are familiar with it. We did change it up a little bit, again, as we mentioned, so there is not as long of a path before you're able to get to some of those referral options as soon as you begin to feel like that is an appropriate thing. But we do still cover, very importantly, we do cover that it's okay to ask about suicide and if they are thinking about suicide. And we do cover what it means to do a warm handoff So if you are concerned that a student has suicidal ideation, what does that look like? So we do it both in the conversation and in the didactics. The other piece of the background on this conversation, for those of you who might not have seen it before, is that this is one where the student did not come to you. So you are seeing some of those signs. You are identifying that this is a student that you want to check in with, and you make an appointment with the student. They come into your office, and you're going to start with you're going to focus on observable behavior. So those non-judgmental, observable behaviors. That's a really key skill that we've now introduced for this conversation as opposed to the first one. So we're really scaffolding those skills and the ability to practice them in the conversations. For this one, the referral option is the counseling center because of the suicidal ideation. We do have more examples of what they can do around a warm handoff or emergency services within the didactic surrounding it as well. So I'll turn it back over to Brian for the last practice scenario.
Thank you. So this is the third conversation. As Kim had mentioned early on, this one is differentiated depending on whether you're faculty or staff. When you first launch the product, you're asked to identify if you want to go through it as a faculty member or as a staff member, and then based on that choice, this scenario, the setup essentially for this scenario is different. So if you're a faculty member, you actually witness an incident in your classroom and have to de-escalate that incident and then have a follow-up conversation with this student who is named Rama. If you're staff, because you're not teaching Rama, you hear about it via a friend of Rama's comes to you, tells you about an incident that happened, and then you end up having a similar conversation. But we try to do differentiation throughout the product, so in the didactics as well, in terms of things that are most relevant to the type of user that you are as you go through the product. Once you're in the conversation itself, it's similar to the first conversation that you had with Maya. It uses those same skills. But you do get a little bit deeper. You find out a little bit more about this character. So you learn some things about Rama. He's dealing with the death of a parent. They're dealing with financial issues. So as that gets uncovered and as you go through the practicing, you have other ideas of additional places to refer to at the end as well. So as we've mentioned throughout this discussion, we're focusing not just on the counseling center. So you hear about financial issues, so you might advise them to talk to the financial aid office and other organizations throughout the campus.
And one of the things that I'll just point out as well is, as we were talking to both faculty and staff, and we interviewed many of the clients that we currently work with, as well as students, some of the things that were brought up that they wanted us to cover in these scenarios we have covered. So in the first conversation, the student is not feeling fully connected. They had a bad relationship breakup, some of the typical stressors of a student. In that second one, there are some issues with grades, missing classes, some of those more identifiable things that you might notice. And then in that last one as well, we covered some of the other pieces, grief and loss, dealing with the death of a family member, and some of the implications that means for their financial as well. That really helps in the diversity of those scenarios and the types of stressors that students are experiencing, but also the breadth of resources available on campus. So really wanted to make sure that we talked a little bit about how we have expanded on some of those scenarios. One of the big pieces, as you guys know, of what we do is we do give feedback as you're going through, because you are able to think critically about your choices, because the student is going to respond to the choice you make. So you can decide what feels right for you in that conversation. You make that choice. That student is going to respond to you in that moment with their voice, with their body language. And so you'll know both from that as well as our coach text, did that go well? Did that not go well? Maybe you used a closed-ended question. Maybe your phrasing of something was more judgmental. How can you reflect and improve on that? And so because we're really basing this off of meeting the learner where they are and giving feedback that's directly to them, these feedback dashboards are very specific to each learner and gives them the ability to think through, here's what I did well, here's what I might change in future conversations. And I will just say that one of the things that we have heard is people want the ability to take those with them. So that is something that is going to be a feature with this as well. You are able to print out those dashboards and remind yourself about those skills, what went well, and what things you might do in those conversations. I'm going to turn it over to Darren to do a quick demo.
Yeah, so we want to show you, give you a snapshot of what it's going to be actually. And so Scott is going to help facilitate that as well. But we also, what I want to share is we're going to give our contact information at the end. If you want to get a demo link, you just contact us and then we'll send you whatever simulations you would like to see. And it may just be faculty and staff simulations, but we also have the student and the other topical areas I discussed before, such as sexual misconduct, alcohol and other drugs. And we also have veterans on campus as well, which complements the at-risk faculty and student mental health very, very well. And so we're going to try this, and we are currently in one of the conversations, I believe it's the faculty conversation. And so we're going to go through a little bit. You see some of the information when it comes down to techniques, but we want to actually show you the conversation pathways. Oh, we can't hear it, Scott.
It's, it's fine. Anyway, I appreciate you taking time. You're probably super busy.
I'm happy to talk. What's on your mind?
Well, I wanted to check in because I know I did really bad on that last test.
Oh, we can talk through the different extra credit options in the syllabus if you want.
Yeah, maybe we can go through that. There's just, sorry, I've had a lot on my mind recently.
All right, so right here is where you're going to see the conversation options. And remember, these are based in evidence-based practices and the learning model that Glenn and Kim was talking about. So you have preset conversation statements that are rooted in those evidence-based practices and really is going to trigger that pathway. So if we're going to focus on class, let's say we're going to tell Maya, you've got a lot going on. Did you make enough time to study?
Seems like you got a lot going on. Did you set aside enough time to study for the test?
I tried, and I meant to, but then...
Maybe that's the problem then.
Yeah, but you don't get it. It's more than that. There's just been, I don't know, a lot going on.
All right, so in that instance, we see that Nathan, the instructor, is really almost blaming there, and Maya, who really is coming to, with a challenge, really needs to open up. And so you see at the bottom, there's the new icon, which is the virtual coach. You're saying you tried to talk to Maya about her test, but that's not her biggest concern right now. Try asking open-ended questions that invite her to share how she feels. So we're going to try another conversation pathway and talk. We could just go talk to another one. So we're going to rephrase. Oh, actually, yeah. Let's connect and say, it sounds like you've been feeling a little down recently.
It sounds like you've been feeling a little down recently.
Maybe a little, yeah.
It's tough when we're in a rut. It can be hard to pull ourselves out.
There's just a lot. And I keep thinking it'll help to go out, meet new people. And instead I end up feeling, at the bowling alley, if you leave that one pin up, like that. That's me getting slowly knocked down by a big metal arm.
All right, so you go down to the coach. Yeah, you interpreted what Maya was telling you and reflected it back to her. She knows you're listening and are there to help. So you can see that is a prime example of that student opening up once you give space for that. And so throughout, you're going to see those different pathways come in where the ultimate goal is to connect them to some form of resource And we have changed it, as Kim was talking about. There's a number of different options depending upon the circumstance, but we have to be in a position to know what is actually going on and not do an automatic referral to the counseling center if the situation does not require that. So that's it for that demo. And so to wrap that up, is there another slide right after that? All right. We want to open it up to questions and answers. And I referenced before that if you would like to see the full demo and kind of play within it yourself, just shoot us an email, info@cognito.com, and it will connect to the appropriate person that can give you that link and any other information that you would need to get a better understanding of the training solution. And so I'll wrap this up by saying, I mentioned before that we have really been focused on being student ready, when it comes down to our students that are for a lot of you all, the students may be already on campus, but really being able to empower our faculty and staff to support students in a different way than what we've had to previously. A lot of the challenges have already existed and everybody has been doing great work. And the training solutions, what you will find, it complements a lot of the great work that everyone is already doing on campus. And we've seen it implemented in a number of different ways, both in a hybrid format. So it's designed to be very much turnkey, but also some people complement it with virtual and in-person conversations as well. And we have material that supports that form of implementation. And so we want to thank you so much for joining us. We're going to open up to Q&A if you have any questions.
Darren, there's one that we always get that we can take from the product side, and that is, can we localize this to our university? And the answer is yes. We make sure that your resources that are available on campus are in there so faculty and staff know exactly what is available. There's a resources section at the end that is entirely set for universities to really make that their own and make sure that it's pointing to what's available on their campus.
Mm-hmm. And I'll extend upon that, those resources, and reflect back onto the implementation. What we've been very intentional about when it comes down to turnkey and implementation is providing you with the resources to have facilitated guided questions with those supportive PowerPoint and discussion guides as well. So you'll be able to be very innovative in how you integrate, and that can be through an overall initiative from academic affairs or student affairs. But also when you think about implementation, I find to be very impactful for those that you may assume that don't have that frontline student communication. So such as our wonderful maintenance and facility staff, right? I found in my experience as being on call, we have gotten a lot of reports from a facilities person who just was loved by the entire campus. But they knew a lot of information. And so imagine there are several of those individuals around campus that we want to think about when it comes down to upskilling and providing them with those experiences to upskill their ability to support students as well.
Darren, we've got another question that's come in here from the audience. One of the many concerns faculty have is the timing required to do training. How long are these trainings and how are they paced?
Yeah, Kim?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we actually have two options for the time of this, because again, we did hear that as well. So the full program is 45 minutes, with the vast majority of that being spent in the ability to practice and spend your time in those conversations, going through and trying different things. We also have an option that is more around about 15 minutes. And the reason for that is you only have to do one practice conversation that's required to get a completion certificate. And the rest of the conversations are then there and available. We did make sure that both of those versions do cover suicidal ideation as well. So those who are using it for that suicide prevention piece are able to use both versions, but we wanted to make it very flexible and give options. So if you wanted to implement this for some sort of completion certificate, you are able to trigger how long you want that to be for that to be required.
Great, thank you. Another question's come in. They'd like, will you please share the link to the JED Cognito white paper we referenced early in the presentation? Absolutely. We will be sharing after this presentation with all registrants a copy of the recording as well as the slides, a demo link to the simulation discussed in this presentation, and as well the JED Cognito white paper for your review. Another question that comes in, how do most schools ensure that staff enroll and complete this training?
Yeah, so it's different for everyone. We've had a lot of partners go through HR as a part of an upskilling initiative, professional development initiative. And so they track it through their system. But you have, and others just made a very intentional push, and that can be via a larger mental health initiative. So everyone does it a little bit differently, and we work with some systems that give access to it, and then the institutions have their autonomy on how they integrate it. Some make it a emphasis with the deans of each college. Let's say academic affairs, for example, then the individual colleges may push it within their faculty. So it really depends on the organizational structure and the buy-in and how much it really is emphasized from senior leadership.
Yeah, and Darren, the one thing I would add to that is part of doing the differentiated path is that faculty really feel like the one for faculty is for faculty. The titles, the scenarios, everything is going to resonate with them. And then the one for staff, the same. So titles change, the intros and how they're interacting with students are very much going to relate to staff. And one of the reasons that we wanted to do that and make that a priority is because this gets rolled out, as Darren said earlier, RAs and others, and we wanted to make sure that this resonated with them. It felt like it was built for them. And so we have very different implementation strategies with whether it's, an RA than if it is with a faculty. And we wanted to make sure that this product worked and resonated with both of those types of audiences.
And just to add, a lot of our clients use our at-risk, the student simulation to upskill student leaders for that as well. But they are definitely able to be utilized in a number of different innovative ways.
Great. Another question here about the resources. Are the localized campus resources vetted by the university representatives, or is it something that the Cognito team bases on what they see on the university's website?
Yeah, great question. So we have the national and local. So when it comes down to the local resources, that is customized to the individual campus. So we know that, and I'll put my camera back on. We know that a lot of offices are named something different, and you also will have particular contact information. So some places may have a 24-hour hotline or number that links to an on-call system, and some have their resources external to the campus. And so you're able to customize it based off of your individual campus structure.
And one thing I'll add to that is you have the option to do it within our system, and we will work with you. You guys would give us the resources and we would build it directly in. Many universities, though, it's still within our system, but it's a hyperlink because they keep those pages updated as they change, and they want to hyperlink directly to those pages as opposed to doing it within our system.
Yeah.
Great. Looks like that might be it for questions. We invite everyone to come back to their screens, and if you have any questions, please submit them into the GoToWebinar control panel. Otherwise, we'll be happy to follow up after this webinar with any questions that you guys may have.
Thank you all so much for attending.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you all very much. Have a nice afternoon.
Bye. All right. So we stopped.